Welcome to Heartening. I'm Dr. Craig Jalquist. In this first episode, I'd like to give you a little bit of background on and context for why I'm doing this video series, which I plan to be weekly. And I'll start with my own reaction to reading the news, usually twice a day, morning and evening. Wow. um, some of it's good news. In fact, you can subscribe to good news services. I have. There's some problems with those. They tend to be kind of shallow. Sometimes they're good from only one perspective and not from others and things like that. I'm glad they're there, but the news, wow. And, because we live in such a highly busy, interconnected world, it seems to some of us who've been around for a while that the complications, the difficulties, the hard interactions, they feel like they're multiplying. So it seems to me that it might be useful to at least have some sort of an online source of inspiration or uplift or hope that you can turn to and get a little bit of rest for your weary soul as you carry on the business of living through the week. And that's what I want this to be, and I hope that it is. And I'm open to feedback about where it's serving you, where it doesn't, what we might add to it. Feel free to provide that. But that's the basic idea behind this. Also, it seems like there is a huge amount of polarization these days, violently opposing points of view, politically, religiously, what have you. And it seems like some of us can't take a positive step forward without being criticized by somebody, which is something that the Buddha actually commented on quite a while back, and as well as other spiritual teachers. And so it can feel discouraging. It can feel like no matter what you try to do, someone's going to roll stones in your way. And so I want this to be at least one place where somebody tells you, just keep going. You're doing the right thing. Just keep going. So that's part of it too. And I know for myself that, the attacks on opponents and the flood of negative news and all the rest of it, some of which we do have to know, it just doesn't motivate me. It just doesn't get me through my day. It doesn't make me want to do anything outside my normal routine. I need some kind of hope and inspiration in order to move forward, and I'm guessing that you might as well. And so if that's true for you, this might be a good video series for you to watch. And it's kind of a mark of our times. The very possibility of hope is under attack now. It's funny because it tends to be the intellectuals who attack hope. And it tends to be the on-the-ground activists like Rebecca Solnit and others who say, no, we absolutely need it, right? So I know from my own life that it's possible to get through a day without hoping for anything. And, James Hillman, the psychologist who I knew, not well, but in passing, he attacked hope at every opportunity by saying that it was a form of denial. It takes us away from what we have to do and all this. But there's a whole other side of hope that's about awaiting what could be and making it happen. It's an active hope, as Joanna Macy would put it, rather than a passive hope. And so that's the sort of hope whose mood I'd like to bring into these videos. The mood of it doesn't have to be this way, which is the title of the first topic in this episode. So we'll get to that in a moment. But a hopeful mood, and also something that I hope is enchanting, whether it's quotations from wise people of the past and present, or whether it's some good news that I share with you, or raising some possibilities for how to look at things differently. I'll draw a bit on my own background as well. Let's see if that'll help us out. And in presenting all this to you for roughly 20, 30 minutes each time, it'll vary. But what I hope is that you'll come away feeling at least a little bit refreshed and maybe a little rested, and with a sense of, oh, well, there's things we can do. There's ways we can be with each other that are better, and provide some relief. So I know I need it on occasion. So these are going to be good for me too. Video therapy or something, right? So we'll see how it goes. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm open to feedback the whole way. So let me know, whatever you want to tell me about these, and I'll give it a thoughtful read. So that's the basic purpose. I'll mention too that I also consider this one of my spiritual practices. However, these videos will be politically and religiously non-partisan. They will not advocate for particular religious or political positions whatsoever. And when I say spiritual, I don't mean supernatural. I mean something more like what we sense in our better moments when maybe we're outside, maybe we're in a state of dream or euphoria, and it just feels like things are meaningful, like there's an order to things. Whitehead, the philosopher, talked about how the universe is in a constant process of creativity, and the source of that creativity, of course, has gone by many names, including the word source, but also big mind. That's a hermetic way of describing it. Universal intelligence, God in the religious traditions, what have you. Animation, that everything is animate and ensouled and inspirited somehow. We'll be talking about that a little bit too. It's just a perspective to try on. There's nothing dogmatic about any of this. And I'm going to put a lot of emphasis on, they're usually called thought experiments, but I think they should be called imagination experiments. Using the imagination as a form of knowledge, as well as a form of delight. And we'll talk about that too. And also how to guard against the misuses of imagination. We're going to go into the power of storytelling, and I'll be telling you some stories as we go. We're going to talk about how to go deeply inside ourselves and discover sources of strength that we may not be aware of, sources of courage, how to make difficult decisions in difficult times. There's a whole list of things I have for you that we'll go over. And so for each week, there will be one basic theme per video that we'll talk about. And feel free to make comments and tell us what you think. And with that, I'll go ahead and introduce the very first topic that we're going to hear about. And as I mentioned, the title is It Doesn't Have to Be This Way. Now, this title, this quotation, doesn't come from, some ancient wisdom master or a particular wisdom tradition. It actually comes from a fictional character who, throughout the entire stretch of a very long film, never receives a name, right? And the film was called The Postman. I actually don't recommend it, but there are certain aspects of it that have always stuck with me. And it's based on a novel, very loosely based on a novel by the science fiction author David Brin, who does name the character, but the film never does, so we'll leave him unnamed. But the reason I'm bringing this up, actually two reasons I'm bringing this up, and these are the reasons that this character stuck with me. The wisdom in fiction, right? We're going to talk a lot about that as we go. For one thing, he grows up in a time after terrible cataclysms have happened. It's sometimes referred to as the post-atomic horror. In this case, it wasn't atomic, it was some other calamity. And the future looks very grim and barren. It's a world of towns that are cut off from each other and fortified and armed. It's kind of the road warrior scenario. And so just to stay alive and to get through everything, this character, he's lucky enough when he's cold and starving to find an abandoned postal truck, an old U.S. post office truck. And there's a skeleton in it, that's how long it's been sitting in there, with a uniform on and a bag of mail next to it. So, whatever the merits or otherwise of the film, I like some of these images, including that one. So he puts the uniform on and picks up the bag of mail, and he goes from town to town BSing people about the restored United States, and I'm a postal office person and all this, a postal carrier, and he does it to be let in so he can eat, right? Now here's the rub, or actually here's the bright spot. In the bag of mail are letters that awaken hope wherever he goes. And so part of the struggle of this character is to realize that he's a genuine hope bearer. So, but he goes by the name The Postman, which is also the name of the film. So that image often has stayed with me because I think a lot of us do that without even realizing it. We're bearers of hope. We give somebody a little kindness or a message that they need to hear at a particular time. And for us, it's some small thing that we may not even take notice of, but for other people, it makes an enormous difference in their lives. So, what if we could do that as a conscious practice? What if we could do that more frequently and in a more aware way? There's a thought I'd like to raise. And so, the other piece of this for me, which is why I recall this film and why I use this as a title, the postman gets into these situations where he's in deep danger, and he, a few times throughout the film, says to people, it doesn't have to be this way. And so I think one of the hugest barriers to changing unjust and unsatisfying and deeply unfair social conditions is the idea that we can't. That we just can't do it. It's gigantic forces are against us that we as individuals can't stand up to. And so we get locked into this belief that, well, this is just the way it's always going to be. The traffic's always going to be this crappy. Politics is always going to be corrupt, and always, 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 right? But when you look through the history of humanity, you see points which are points of sudden change, and they do alternate with stretches of people putting up with all kinds of stuff that we shouldn't put up with. But sometimes all it takes is just a whisper in the right place at the right time to restructure a system from the ground up. So one of the sayings I've taken as a motto is from a fictional character. It doesn't have to be this way. It really doesn't, especially if we get together with other people who aren't satisfied with the situation and do something about it. So oppressive forces in particular are deeply invested in dividing us from each other so that we never organize that way. But what you see time and again is that when enough people get together and say no, things change, and they change pretty damn quick. So it doesn't have to be this way. That would be not only a message for this and a topic for this first video, but also maybe a call, maybe a summons. How do I let this work on me? How do I feel called to respond to what's happening out in the world? Now, there's a term I coined a while back, and you can search for it on the internet because I've written articles and put them up. Other people have too, called enchantivism. And so this refers to types of storytelling and performance where we depict how things could be. And so the thing about enchantivism is it's not just positive hoping or visioning or anything like that. It starts with a situation that shouldn't be the way that it is. Whether it's some huge wrong that's been done to people or even small situations that just pinch. And so somebody decides to go the route of imagination, and they get together with other people and they invent a new way of looking at the entire situation. This is how things should be, and they do it in art and performance and photography and storytelling and all kinds of different venues. And so when I coined that word enchantivism, I just gave a name to something that already exists. And there's lots of examples of it out there. I did a video on this, by the way, in YouTube. So if you go in and search for my name in enchantivism, it'll pull it up. But enchantivism is a possibility for people who either don't feel called to the path of activism or have been on that path and are burned out or injured or what have you and don't want to do it anymore. So I'm mentioning enchantivism in this video, not to go into detail about how to do it, but to emphasize that everyone can do something, and that the way we perceive ourselves and our relationships and the world around us depends in large part on the stories that we tell each other about how all this is. If you change the story, you change the perception, and actions that are new come from that, whether they're individual actions or the actions of many people. Enchantivism, too, is also one form of collective visioning or restorying. It could go by different names. And that's something that you don't hear much of in the news either. Where's the collective visions that are compelling? Where are the ideas for how we can move forward that people can really get behind, and the pictures that go with the ideas, right? As someone said long ago, when there is no vision, the people perish. And so it seems like a good way to move forward together is to start getting together to have new visions about possibilities that we'd like to live in and ways of being that we could live in. So, there's many examples, you'll be hearing about them as we go, of how something that had first appeared in maybe an individual's imagination, maybe in a work of fiction, became reality. Fiction changes reality. And they're not really as separate as we like to think. So that's something that we'll be dealing with too as we go forward. So, hence my choice of a piece of fiction to get us started on our very first topic here. Because fiction, storytelling, whatever you want to call it, does make a difference to how we learn and to how we live. So I think that'll suffice for our first go at this. I'm eager to see how you like these, what you think we can do with them, and where we can go with them. May your week be filled with blessings.